I am really glad that this episode exists. It's not fun to dislike an episode, both due to the reasons that we provided in our Bats video, and for the simple fact that I don't like watching episodes like Some Pony to Watch Over Me, where conveyance takes a back seat while the idiot ball takes the wheel. Fast forward a week later and the two of us watch an episode that was, at least to us, a complete breath of fresh air.
Maud Pie is an episode written by Noelle Benvenuti, another writer that was completely off the radar for Vicodin and I until a few days before the episode's release, when Megan revealed it on her Twitter. As far as we were able to tell, this episode wasn't as polarizing as last week's, despite a few problems that we'll get into later. Vicodin admittedly had no opinions or hopes for this episode before it was shown, since he was not disappointed by a Pinky episode yet, although now we're able to watch it, we can clarify that this is more of an ensemble cast episode, with Pinky filling in her spots every now and again.
The episode starts with the main six minus Pinky showing up at Pinky's house, wondering why they were asked to come this early. They're all thrown into the house, and Pinkie Pie explains that she needs her friends to taste test the gigantic amount of rock candy that she was preparing. This opener was funny and enjoyable, and Alex and I wouldn't change a single thing about it. Rainbow slamming into the door was hilarious, more for me since I'm not a fan of Rainbow Dash, and Pinky's adorable smile at the end of the opener just melted my heart. Excellent job.
We come into Act 1, and the remaining 5 are indisposed due to a hilarious amount of rock candy that Pinky made. Pinky explains the super duper special tradition necklaces that she wants to make, and we get this awesome flashback sequence that reminds Vicodin of the last episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog, with the crayon drawings, although admittedly the moods are completely different. Within the flashback, Maud and Pinky made the necklaces with the Pie family special recipe, which apparently contains rocks. No wonder their teeth were hurting.
Apparently Maud is coming down to Ponyville before she leaves to get a Rockturret? That was just too easy for you, wasn't it, Noelle? And yet, I can't stop laughing whenever I think of it. Rockturret. Alright, we're getting off topic. The problem with the episode immediately came to light for Alex and I once Pinky explained that she wanted her sister and her friends to become as good of friends as they were with her. So basically, a huge group of friends was Pinky's goal. Combined with the Zap to its spoilers, it was easy to tell that something along the lines of their characters would get in the way of them being friends. If they didn't have a problem being friends, then there would be no episode. The rock necklaces become the problem since to Pinky, they're made and swapped once the giver and recipient are best friends. But we'll save that for later.
This entire scene in Sugar Cube Corner is excellent as well. The dialogue flows from line to line without any hiccups, and not a single action by the main six feels out of place. Matter of fact, with Pinky's adorable head pat and Rainbow playing the peanut gallery, we'd say that the characterization of the main six hasn't been this spot on in a while. Throughout some of the episodes ever since, probably the beginning of the series, there's always been slightly different characterization choices with each writer. A good example is the one we provided on our previous episode with Larson and Fluttershy. But in this scene, it's just excellent from start to finish. Fast forward to the next scene, and this is where we get Maud's introduction, but not before the main six wonder what she's going to be like. Rarity has troubles with her hat falling apart, along with, oh my god, Rarity Scrunchy Face!
That gets us every time. Twilight worries about hitting it off with Maud, and she finally shows up after getting distracted by a rock. Twilight introduces everyone to Maud, and we get the hilarious back and forth between Rarity and Maud.
Pinkie Pie tells me you share my love for fashion.
I'm really into expressing myself through my wardrobe.
And what is the delightful frock you're wearing now saying?
It doesn't talk. It's a dress.
Oh, yes, of course. I just meant the frock doesn't speak.
Immediately, we begin to see the fandom headcanon portrayed in this episode, or at least the headcanon that a lot of people have been throwing around, the possibility that Maud might be somewhere on the autism spectrum. We'll get to that at the end of the video. Maud introduces her pet rock, and Pinky grows excited over their possible bonding by the end of Act 1. This commercial break was excellently placed, considering all Maud needed was the two examples of her awkwardness in order to alert the watcher of what the episode is going to be for the rest of the time. Maud's odd behavior and lack of awareness fuels the dry humor throughout the episode, and the problem over Maud and the remaining five's inability to click becomes apparent to them and is completely lost on Pinky.
This is obvious because A, she's Pinky, and as such, a lot of things that would be considered common knowledge, like personal space for example, are lost on her. A good example of this is during A Friend Indeed when Pinky asked Ponyville for a new toupee. It completely embarrassed Doodle, but Pinky wasn't aware of that because her focus was on getting a new wig. The same goes for this scenario. Pinky just assumes that everyone is going to get along fine because she already made a ridiculous amount of rock candy, and she thinks that it's easy for Maud to get along with others. but that simply isn't the case, as conveyed throughout the rest of the episode.
We go into Act 2, where Maud feeds the rest of her sandwich to Boulder, somehow, and she eats part of Rarity's rock hat instead of the muffins. I once again chuckle as Pinky eats a muffin as well, and they both say that the muffins are crunchy. Rainbow asks Maud if she likes any games, and Maud introduces her favorite.
Boulder and I sometimes play a game called Camouflage. It's kind of like hide and seek, but way more intense.
This voice actress is amazing. We're only a third of the way into the episode, and every single line that has come out of her has been golden. I know some people thought that it was Raven's voice, but we know now that it's Ingrid Nilsson, who previously provided voice work for a number of Strawberry Shortcake episodes. Skip to the next scene, and the main six are looking for Boulder. Pinky is having the time of her life, another scene where I chuckled, while the others aren't. Twilight provides the voice of reason for the group, explaining that it would hurt Maud's feelings if they stopped the game, and they decide to continue until Maud reveals that the rock was in her pocket. Rainbow gets annoyed, and Pinky and Maud leave while the remaining five discuss Maud.
They decide that Maud was possibly being shy because she had to meet them all at once, so they want to spend time with her individually in order to warm up to her. After all, the best friend rock necklaces are at stake. Rarity's visit is first, which basically culminates in a dish towel scarf. Fluttershy's visit fails to spark anything since she knows nothing about rocks, while that's the only thing that captures Maud's attention. She also conveys the problem that all the main six have through her one line of, "I don't even think we're friends." Twilight's visit introduces us to Maud's poetry, which I feel deserves a Pulitzer Prize. Without further ado, rock.
Rock. You are a rock. Gray. You are gray. Like a rock. Which you are. Rock.
I love this episode so much. Meanwhile, Applejack's visit is mostly Maud's bluntness being construed as honesty, along with her inability to peel an apple, probably because maybe Maud never had apples back at the farm or wherever she lives. Rainbow's visit is probably the most entertaining, as Maud throws a rock beyond the horizon that creates a shockwave, but Rainbow immediately doesn't click with Maud since she doesn't enjoy winning. Rainbow's gasp is the highlight of that visit scene. Every pony meets back at Sugar Cube Corner, and what I feel should be the real lesson that we take from this episode is explained, as Applejack says.
We just wouldn't feel right making something that means we're best friends if, well, we aren't.
The remaining five's uncomfortable feelings throughout this scene are excellently portrayed as they pause, wave hooves of her eye contact, and do everything they can to finish each other's sentences and admit the problem. Pinky deflates and closes the door behind her, injecting a huge speedball of feels for the final commercial break. Now this is the part where Vicodin and I made that this should have been the moral of the episode. After all, practically every single episode that dealt with friendship since the show's inception involved the main characters solving their problems with friendship or becoming friends with someone, minus the main villain episodes, although friendship definitely had something to do with those. Whenever the main six tried, they made friends, but this is one of those episodes where it doesn't really happen, and I'd argue that that's a good thing for them. If there's one thing that I feel needed to be conveyed in an MLP episode thus far, it's the fact that not everyone is going to be your friend, despite how much you try. This was sort of touched upon in A Friend Indeed, but that was a Pinky episode, and I doubt the main moral from it completely sunk in with the rest of the cast.
And to be fair, Pinky's friends did try really hard to befriend Maud. They spent practically the whole day trying, and every attempt came up short because of the simple fact that they can't really click. And it's not because of Maud, both sides are unable to click. Maud can't click with the friends because she's not interested in them, and her interests are vastly different in scope compared to the interests of her friends, despite what Pinky says. It's much like how even though Alex and I are writers, we don't really talk about each other's work that much, considering we both write completely different genres and like different genres as a result. So as such, I don't really touch crossover stories, while Alex doesn't like sad fics.
The same goes for all of Maud's other interests, and that was conveyed throughout every scene. Of course, Pinky doesn't realize this as we come back for the final act. She brings her friends and Maud towards this newly created obstacle course and intends for the myriad of interests of all her friends and her sister to click once they take part in it. Pinky goes throughout the obstacle course and gets stuck, and we get Super Maud to the rescue with her awesome drill move that annihilates the rock that would have most likely crushed Pinky. Maud reprimands Pinky and decides to go back to the rock farm after reinforcing the moral that Pinky's friends decide on before the end of Act 2.
Pinky runs off with Maud, and the remaining five marvel about Maud's sudden call to action and come to the conclusion that what they have in common is that they would do anything for Pinky. This, combined with the last few minutes of the episode, is where we saw the most contention. The contention mostly consists of the opinion that this moral was shoehorned into the end of the episode, so it feels awkward, especially considering the more realistic moral that Maud and even the remaining five previously came up with. Now, as far as this moral being vastly inferior to the first one, we completely agree with that. But we're only 4 minutes away from finishing the episode, so we'll get to that when it's done.
We skip to a scene of Maud on the train with Pinky as she uncomfortably, at least we think, pulls out Boulder and begins to play with it while they speak. The two apologize, and once they get off the train, they see Pinky's friends for a few bags of rock candy. Twilight apologizes for their inability to click with Maud and explains that what makes them click is their love and adoration for Pinkie Pie. Maud agrees, and we get another hilarious picture of Pinky cartwheeling in the background while Maud explains her apparent lack of enthusiasm. We skip to the train where the main six give their rock candy necklaces to Maud, and Maud accepts Pinky's but puts it in a box as she admits that while she doesn't like rock candy, she does love Pinkie Pie. End of episode.
Alright, first things first. This episode was amazing to us, despite the few things that we're about to deconstruct. Every scene with Maud was pure liquid gold, and like we said in the Bats video, this episode was full of facial and environmental nuances that only seemed to draw me more into the episode with each additional instance. I think Rainbow's characterization could be debated since she seems to go to season 1 degrees of rudeness and a short-fused temper, although that didn't really ruin her for me like in Some Pony to Watch Over Me did. We don't want to bring that episode up again because we explained our discomfort with it in a previous video, but when it came to overall character and scene conveyance, this episode practically did everything better. The only thing that felt contrived was the final moral that the episode seemed to go with, but it doesn't bug me because I've kind of gotten tired of the morals in the show anyway. It's not that I want them to disappear, I just feel that the morals don't need to be explained to us as much as they used to be, kind of like when Megan said at a previous writers panel that the letters to Celestia in season 3 were being cut in certain episodes because the morals speak for themselves and don't have to be repeated. Along with that, I'm not exactly petty enough to where I would consider an episode to be terrible just because of a bad or poorly conveyed moral. That's the least of my worries if, like I said, every scene was liquid gold.
On the contrary, I kinda miss the letters to Celestia, but I'd rather have a good moral than a forced letter at the end. Guess I just need to compromise. Other than that, I pretty much agree with Vicodin. The episode felt great, Maud was a surprisingly good character despite being so apathetic, and everything just sort of clicked together, unlike, the main six and Maud.
With all of that said, let's discuss Maud. A lot of people thought that she was possibly on the autism spectrum, considering her inability to grasp social cues, lack of displayed emotion, lack of social communication, and obsession over one particular interest, which in this case happens to be rocks. Some individuals even go so far as to become extremely adept in their interest, and judging by how Maud is getting a rocktorate, if we correlate this to a doctorate, which is one of the highest American degrees, then this is another reason for this headcanon. Granted, neither Alex and I know much about autism. The most I know is what's on Wikipedia and from what I noticed from one of my cousins, who happens to be on the spectrum as well. As far as autism characteristics are concerned, they all seem to fit Maud to a T, including atypical eating, which is apparently common. A few symptoms of autism might run in the Pie family as well, considering Pinky doesn't pick up a lot of social cues, which could entertain the idea that Pinky might be on one of the lower sides of the spectrum. But considering we have a numerous amount of flashbacks now that show Pinkie Pie behaving more or less perfectly in public, I don't think that's the case.
However, there are different kinds of autism, such as pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, which is basically the disorder that's given to people that seem to fit the autism spectrum but don't have all of the symptoms. I've heard a few theories that Pinky might be autistic as well, and while we won't agree with that, we can put a lot of merit behind the idea that Pinky might have the aforementioned disorder. After all, she does show a few autism symptoms such as what we previously said about social cues. A friend indeed was practically the pinnacle of this type of behavior, and her compulsive behavior of wanting to make sure that everyone in Ponyville is happy. Although since Pinky frequently finds new ways in order to make others happy, we wouldn't say that behavior is repetitive, it's just who she is, as the element of laughter. There is the possibility that the sonic rainbow was what instilled the element in her as a coping mechanism, thus causing her to smooth over her social interactions via chasing the precise goal of making Pony smile, her tool being parties and laughter.
And now the moral. Now let me explain how I first watched the episodes, and I don't think this is the same for Alex. I watched the episodes at noon, around 5 hours after everyone has already seen it and formed an opinion. I watch it practically 10 minutes after I wake up because I have nothing to do on Saturday. With that said, when the moral that Twilight brought up in the last 4 minutes of the episode was shown, that kind of knocked me out of my pony trance. This is because I've seen this trope being played with in cartoons before. It made me think of the Fairly OddParents episode when Timmy felt guilty that Dinkelberg had so much good and expensive stuff because Timmy's parents spent all their money on him. Dad and Mom explained that there's one thing that Dinkelberg don't have and they do, and that's Timmy. Although I'm not really sure that this correlates as much as I want it to.
What Vicodin is trying to say is that this moral has been used in countless cartoons, but the conveyance of this moral was more or less the point of the episode, rather than what it is in this one. The moral really isn't sold to us because the entire episode helps back up the moral that Pinky's friends brought up at the end of Act 2, that sometimes people just can't be friends with one another. The final moral feels sort of forced, but to us, it's not as awkward as it could have been. We actually have a headcanon behind the choice in this final moral, and it's due to a correlation with the Wonderbolt Academy ending, which is revealed on Megan's Twitter and scrapped. In the original Wonderbolt Academy ending, Rainbow Dash leaves the Academy for good, which for the time being would have ended Rainbow Dash's character arc for being a Wonderbolt. However, the ending was changed to what we see now.
It's possible that the moral at the end of Act 2 is the original moral, but it could have been changed to avoid confusing and, for lack of a better word, saddening the target demographic. Then maybe a scene was cut and this new moral was thrown in instead. We're not going to say that's the case because it might have just been a writer's slip-up, but the whole episode was perfectly conveyed up until the scene with the second moral. And even the scenes in between were still perfect, such as the train ride during Act 3 and the final scene with the rock candy necklaces. Now, I guess the question we could ask is, what problems do we have with the second moral? Well, for us, it's practically two problems.
The first problem is the one we mentioned earlier, how it felt shoehorned in compared to the previous one. The second one, however, is mostly subjective, so take it with a grain of salt. As far as this moral is concerned, we don't really think that you can be friends with someone, especially big enough friends to be trading these traditional necklaces, if all you have on your friendship is your adoration for one person. Now, to be fair, you could argue that this is a stepping stone for Maud and Pinky's friends to become even bigger friends, since obviously they aren't going to be best of friends over 2 days. That's fair. But the problem we have with this is best explained by an example of the Rainbow Dash fan club in Mysterious Ne'er-do-well.
While it's a rough assumption, we're going to assume that all of the ponies in Rainbow Dash fan club are friends. They're gathered there because of Rainbow Dash. Now, it's possible that the ponies in there aren't friends and are merely acquaintances with the shared interest of Rainbow Dash. That's fair, and that kind of correlates to our point. All of Pinky's friends tried to share their interests with Maud, and each of them failed at it. Maud either simply wasn't interested, like with Rainbow or Applejack, or she was interested, but her interests were vastly different than the friends, like with Fluttershy, Twilight, and Rarity. Just like how I wouldn't call my Skype friends my best friends just because we like ponies or analysis or fanfics, I wouldn't consider the friendship that Pinky's friends and Maud have as a best friendship, just because of their love for Pinkie Pie.
If Pinky holds these best friend traditional necklaces under such high regard, then they shouldn't have been made, but it's not like she knew that considering her friends and her sister's agreement to call themselves best friends. And even then, it's not like Maud and Pinky's friends are unable to be best friends just because of the portrayal provided in this episode. I feel that they're actually in the right direction, especially since Pinky's friend showed sympathy for Maud after she admitted her inability to show enthusiasm, which was probably something very embarrassing, even if obvious, for her to admit. There's a lot of factors to friendship, and it's not that hard to imagine Twilight writing a letter to Maud asking how she's doing, or something simple like that. Like with magic, anything is possible with friendship. You know, because friendship is magic. We're just gonna go now. Well, that about covers this episode of In Retrospect. Make sure to subscribe if you already haven't, leave us a question about the episode if you want, and on that note, we'll see you next week. Have a good day and pony on.